This story is titled, In-Laws Convinced My Wife I Was Cheating When They Saw Me at a Jewelry Store. I was actually picking up our anniversary gift, but she'd already moved out with our kids. You know the feeling when your entire world collapses in just 3 days? When everything you built over 15 years, your marriage, your family, your reputation crumbles because of one misinterpreted moment? That's what happened to me last month. And I'm still trying to piece together how my life went from perfect to completely destroyed, all because I wanted to surprise my wife with an anniversary gift. I'm Mike, 38M, and until recently, I lived what I thought was the perfect life with my wife Jessica, 36F, and our 2 kids, Emma, 8F, and Lucas, 6M, in a quiet suburb of Minneapolis. We had the kind of marriage other couples envy: 15 years of genuine happiness, mutual respect, and deep love. Jessica and I met in college, and from our first date, everything just clicked. We both worked hard. I'm an architect, and she's a pediatric nurse, and we built our life brick by brick, supporting each other through every challenge. Jessica's parents, Robert, 65M, and Linda, 63F, had always been a significant part of our lives. They lived just 20 minutes away and were deeply involved with our kids. Robert, a retired high school principal, was the kind of father-in-law who'd drop everything to help fix something around the house. And Linda was always there for Jessica, especially after both pregnancies. I used to think of them as my second set of parents. Our marriage wasn't perfect, no relationship is, but we always faced our problems together. We had our occasional disagreements about household responsibilities or parenting decisions, but we never went to bed angry. Communication was our strongest point, or so I believed. That's what makes everything that happened next feel like I'm living in some kind of nightmare. Our 15th anniversary was approaching, and I had been planning something special for months. Jessica had always dreamed of having her grandmother's sapphire ring reset into a more modern design. Her grandmother passed away 5 years ago, and the ring had been sitting in our safe deposit box ever since. I found an exclusive jewelry designer who specialized in custom pieces, and I had been working with them secretly to create the perfect anniversary surprise. Looking back now, I can see how a series of small coincidences and misunderstandings led to this catastrophe. If I hadn't been so focused on keeping the surprise, if I had just told Jessica where I was going that day, if her parents hadn't happened to drive by that particular jewelry store at that exact moment. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how everything fell apart, you need to know about the week leading up to what I now call the incident. What I didn't know then was that Jessica had been having a rough time at work. A young patient she'd grown close to had taken a turn for the worse, and she was carrying that emotional burden alone, trying not to worry me. Meanwhile, Linda had recently joined a new church group that had been filling her head with stories about unfaithful husbands and broken marriages. These separate threads were about to weave together into a perfect storm that would tear my family apart. I never imagined that my attempt to create a beautiful surprise would end with my wife moving out, my children being taken away, and my in-laws spreading vicious lies about me throughout our community. But that's exactly what happened, and the worst part? I never saw it coming. The week before everything imploded, I noticed subtle changes in Jessica's behavior. She was staying later at work, which wasn't unusual given her dedication to her patients, but there was something different about her demeanor. She seemed distant, distracted. When I asked if everything was okay, she'd give me that tired smile and say she was just exhausted from work. I should have pushed harder, should have seen the storm clouds gathering. That same week, I had 3 secret meetings with the jewelry designer, Rachel, 42F. The ring was coming along beautifully, and Rachel was helping me plan the perfect way to present it to Jessica. These meetings were during my lunch breaks, but I had to lie about where I was going. I hate lying, even white lies for surprises, but I wanted this to be perfect. If only I knew those innocent lies would later be twisted into something sinister. Linda had been acting strange too. She started dropping by our house more frequently, always when Jessica was home, but I was at work. At the time, I thought nothing of it. She was just being a supportive mother during what I now know was a difficult time for Jessica at work. But Linda had also been attending these weekly marriage preservation meetings at her new church, led by a woman named Patricia, 58F, who had apparently built quite a following by exposing unfaithful husbands in the community. Looking back, the signs were all there. Linda started making odd comments during our Sunday family dinners. Little jabs about how men can't be trusted, how they always stray after 15 years of marriage, how women need to protect themselves. I laughed these off. That was my second mistake. I should have recognized the seeds of suspicion being planted in my wife's mind. Then came the Tuesday before everything fell apart. I had my final meeting with Rachel to pick up the finished ring. It was absolutely perfect, her grandmother's sapphire now nestled in a modern platinum setting, with tiny diamonds arranged like stars around it. I was so excited about the surprise that I didn't notice the black SUV driving past the jewelry store. I didn't see Linda's shocked face in the passenger seat as Robert drove by, or the way she frantically grabbed her phone. What I didn't know then was that Linda had already been warning Jessica about certain patterns she'd noticed in my behavior. The occasional late lunches. The cleared browser history on our shared computer. I'd been researching jewelry designs. The slightly distracted demeanor as I planned the surprise. In Linda's mind, warped by Patricia's influence, these weren't the actions of a loving husband planning an anniversary gift. They were the classic signs of infidelity she'd been learning about in her meetings. That evening, I came home to find Jessica unusually quiet. She'd barely touched her dinner, and when I tried to hug her, she flinched away. I assumed it was related to her difficult case at work. Her patient, a 7-year-old girl named Lily, had been going through a particularly rough treatment. I gave her space, telling myself we'd talk when she was ready. Another mistake? Because while I was respecting her space, Linda was filling it with poison. I went to bed that night still thinking about how perfect our anniversary would be, how Jessica's face would light up when she saw her grandmother's sapphire transformed into something new yet familiar. Instead, I was about to learn how quickly trust can unravel, and how devastating assumptions can be when filtered through the lens of fear and suspicion. What happened next would shake the foundations of everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my in-laws, and the fragility of trust. But the worst part? The real betrayal hadn't even begun. Wednesday morning started like any other day. I kissed Jessica goodbye as she left for her early shift at the hospital, made breakfast for the kids, and dropped them off at school. I had no idea that by the time I got home that evening, my life would be unrecognizable. Around 2 p.m., I received a text from Jessica that made my blood run cold. "Don't bother coming home tonight. I know everything." My hands started shaking as I called her, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried again. And again. Nothing. What did she mean she knew everything? The only secret I had was the anniversary gift, and that was supposed to be a happy surprise. Then, the messages started flooding in. First from Robert, telling me I was a disgrace, and that he'd always known I would hurt his daughter. Then from Linda, a long paragraph about how she'd seen me with that woman at the jewelry store, how she'd finally caught me in the act. My mind was spinning. Did they think Rachel, the jewelry designer, was something else? I felt sick to my stomach. I left work early, my hands trembling so badly I could barely drive. When I pulled into our driveway, I noticed something was wrong immediately. Jessica's car was there, but so were Robert's SUV and a moving van. A moving van. My heart nearly stopped. I rushed inside to find Jessica and Linda packing boxes in our living room. Emma and Lucas were sitting on the stairs, looking confused and scared. When they saw me, they ran toward me, but Linda quickly pulled them back. The look of disgust on her face was something I'll never forget. Jessica wouldn't even look at me. She was methodically packing photo albums, our whole life together being sorted into cardboard boxes. When I tried to explain about the ring, about the surprise, Linda cut me off. She'd done her research. She'd followed me to the jewelry store multiple times. She'd seen me meeting with Rachel, had even taken photos. Photos that, without context, looked exactly like what she convinced Jessica they were evidence of an affair. But here's the cruel twist: the evidence Linda presented wasn't just about the jewelry store visits. She constructed an entire false narrative around random moments from the past few months. The time I ran into my old college friend Amy, 37F, at the grocery store and chatted for 10 minutes. Linda had been there, and now it was proof of suspicious behavior. The late nights I spent working on the ring design on my laptop, secret messages to other women. Every innocent moment had been twisted into something sinister. What broke me wasn't just Jessica's refusal to listen, it was the realization that she'd been quietly watching me for weeks, interpreting every action through the lens of suspicion her mother had created. The night I'd worked late to finish a project, she'd driven by my office to check on me. The lunch meetings with Rachel? She'd had her friend Marie, 35F, from the hospital follow me. My own wife had been investigating me, all while I was working to create the perfect surprise for our anniversary. I tried to reach for the ring box in my briefcase to show them the truth, but Robert stepped between us. He was already calling someone on his phone his lawyer friend, I would later learn. The same lawyer who would help Jessica file for emergency custody the next day. As I watched them pack up 15 years of memories, I kept thinking this had to be a nightmare. How could a loving gesture turn into this? How could the people who'd known me for over a decade suddenly believe I was capable of such betrayal? But the worst was yet to come, because what Linda had set in motion that day would spiral far beyond our family, reaching into every corner of our lives and community. And through it all, the sapphire ring sat in my briefcase, its perfect setting now a mockery of the life I thought I had. That night, I slept in my car outside our house. I couldn't bear the thought of leaving my kids, even though Jessica had taken them to her parents' home. I kept calling and texting, trying to explain about the ring, about Rachel being a jewelry designer, about the anniversary surprise. But Jessica had blocked my number, and my messages to Linda and Robert went unanswered. The next morning, I went to work in yesterday's clothes, shell-shocked and desperate. That's when I discovered how quickly Linda had been working to destroy my reputation. My colleague Mark, 41M, who had been my friend for over a decade, wouldn't even look at me when I walked in. Later, I learned that Linda had called his wife the night before, warning her about me. She'd apparently spent the evening calling every couple we knew, spreading her version of events. But the real gut punch came when I checked my email during lunch. There it was, a message from Jessica's lawyer, containing temporary custody arrangements and a restraining order. A restraining order? I couldn't go within 500 feet of my own children because of Linda's paranoid delusions. The lawyer's words swam before my eyes. Pattern of suspicious behavior, emotional distress, protecting the children's well-being. They were using my secrecy about the anniversary gift as proof of my deceptive nature. I drove straight to Rachel's jewelry store, hoping she could help explain everything. But Rachel had her own shocking news. Linda had visited the store that morning, causing a scene and accusing Rachel of being my mistress. She threatened to expose the business on social media and had already posted negative reviews claiming the store was a front for helping unfaithful husbands. Rachel was sympathetic, but asked me not to come back. Her business couldn't afford this kind of publicity. What happened next made everything even worse. Remember Jessica's patient, Lily, the sick little girl? Well, Linda somehow got in touch with Lily's mother through the hospital grapevine. She twisted my jewelry store visits into something so sinister that Lily's mother filed a complaint with the hospital board, suggesting Jessica's judgment might be compromised by her unstable home situation. Jessica's career, which she'd built over 15 years of dedicated service, was now under scrutiny because of her own mother's actions. I tried reaching out to our mutual friends, but Linda had been thorough. She joined forces with Patricia from her church group, and together they crafted a narrative that painted me as a master manipulator who had finally been exposed. Patricia had apparently been watching me at church for months and now claimed she'd seen signs of my sinful nature all along. Every time I checked my phone during services or stepped out to take a work call was now being reframed as evidence of my double life. The isolation was complete. People I'd known for years crossed the street to avoid me. Parents at my kids' school requested their children be kept away from Emma and Lucas, as if my supposed infidelity was somehow contagious. Even my own mother started getting calls from concerned church members, asking if she'd known all along about my other life. Through all of this, the sapphire ring sat in my briefcase, its blue stone seeming to mock me. Every time I looked at it, I thought about how its transformation was supposed to symbolize the renewal of our love. Instead, it had become a symbol of how easily love could be twisted into suspicion, trust into accusation. But just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, I received a text from an unknown number. It was from Marie, Jessica's friend, who had followed me to the jewelry store. She had something to tell me, something that would change everything, but she was afraid of Linda finding out. What she revealed next would finally start to unravel Linda's web of lies. But at what cost? I met Marie at a small coffee shop 2 towns over, where Linda's influence hadn't reached. The moment she sat down, I could see she was nervous, constantly checking her phone and glancing over her shoulder. What she told me made my blood boil. Marie had been following me that day at Linda's request, convinced she was helping her friend uncover my infidelity. But she'd actually witnessed my final meeting with Rachel, had seen the ring being handed over, had heard our conversation about the surprise. She'd even taken photos as evidence, photos that clearly showed Rachel explaining the ring's features and giving me care instructions. But here's the part that made me feel physically sick. Marie had tried to tell Linda the truth immediately. She'd called her that very evening, explaining that I was clearly planning an anniversary surprise. Linda's response? She told Marie to keep quiet, that she was too naive to see the truth. According to Marie, Linda had been convinced for months that I was unfaithful, and she'd been actively looking for evidence to prove her theory. Why was Marie coming forward now? Because Linda's crusade had started affecting Jessica's work at the hospital. The complaint from Lily's mother was just the beginning. Linda had been calling other parents of Jessica's patients, warning them about the situation. Marie couldn't stand by and watch Jessica's career be destroyed by her own mother's actions. But that wasn't all. Marie revealed something even more disturbing. She'd overheard Linda talking to Patricia after a church meeting. They weren't just spreading rumors, they were strategically destroying my reputation to ensure Jessica wouldn't believe me even if I tried to explain about the ring. They had coordinated with other church members to create a network of witnesses who had claimed they'd seen signs of my infidelity over the years. The truth about Linda's obsession went deeper than anyone knew. Marie had discovered that Linda's own marriage to Robert had survived an infidelity scare 20 years ago, a misunderstanding similar to mine, that had nearly torn their family apart. Linda had never truly healed from that experience, and Patricia's marriage preservation group had reawakened all her old fears and suspicions. Marie showed me the photos she'd taken of the ring exchange, clear evidence of my innocence. But when I reached for my phone to forward them to Jessica, Marie stopped me. Linda had convinced Jessica to join the church group's private online community, where Patricia and other members were constantly feeding her stories about unfaithful husbands who tried to gaslight their wives with elaborate explanations. If I sent the photos now, they would just twist them into more evidence of my manipulation. As I sat there, staring at the proof of my innocence on Marie's phone, she dropped another bombshell. Linda's campaign wasn't just about me anymore. She and Patricia had started targeting other husbands in the community, using my case as proof of how well-respected men could lead double lives. They created a climate of fear and suspicion that was affecting dozens of families. I asked Marie why she didn't just show the photos to Jessica directly. Her answer chilled me. She tried, but Linda had convinced Jessica that Marie had been compromised, that I had somehow manipulated her into helping me cover my tracks. The same Marie who had been Jessica's friend since nursing school was now being painted as my co-conspirator. Just then, Marie's phone buzzed with a text. The color drained from her face as she read it. Linda had somehow discovered our meeting, and what she was planning to do next would change everything again. But this time, her actions would finally push someone unexpected to take a stand. The text that had frightened Marie was from Robert, my father-in-law, asking to meet her privately. At first, we assumed Linda had sent it from his phone, but what happened next changed everything. Robert had been quietly watching his wife's behavior spiral out of control. The final straw came when he overheard Linda on the phone with Lily's mother, actively trying to get Jessica suspended from her job. Something in him snapped. He realized the woman he'd been supporting wasn't the same person he'd married 40 years ago. What Robert revealed to us over coffee that evening shook me to my core. 20 years ago, when Linda thought he was having an affair, it wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was a pattern. Linda had accused 3 different women of being involved with Robert, had spread rumors throughout their previous community, and had nearly gotten him fired from his principal position. The situation only resolved when Linda agreed to seek counseling. But now, with Patricia's influence, all those old patterns had resurged stronger than ever. Robert admitted he'd been too weak, too conflict-averse to stop Linda when she first started spreading rumors about me. He convinced himself that supporting his wife was more important than standing up for the truth. Now, seeing her try to destroy not just my life, but her own daughter's career, he couldn't stay silent anymore. Robert had proof of everything. He'd been secretly recording Linda's phone conversations after the incident with Lily's mother. He had text messages showing how Linda and Patricia coordinated their attacks on my reputation. Most importantly, he had Linda's diary, where she'd written about seeing me with the ring, admitting she knew it was for our anniversary, but convinced herself it was a cover story. The diary entries were disturbing. Linda had written about how she couldn't let Jessica make the same mistake she had made by trusting too easily. She wrote about how she had to save Jessica, even if it meant destroying her marriage. The level of calculation was staggering. She'd been planning this intervention for months, waiting for any sign that could be twisted into evidence of infidelity. But Robert's revelation came with a devastating detail about Jessica. Our children had been asking questions about why they couldn't see me, and Jessica had started having doubts about her mother's accusations. In response, Linda had convinced Jessica to join an intensive healing retreat run by Patricia's church group. The retreat was starting tomorrow, and phones weren't allowed. It was clearly designed to isolate Jessica further from any possibility of learning the truth. Robert had tried to talk Jessica out of going, which had led to a huge fight between him and Linda. That's when he'd finally seen how far his wife had fallen into her paranoid beliefs. Linda had accused him of choosing sides with the enemy and threatened to expose his own past infidelities to their entire church community. As we sat there, processing everything, Robert's phone kept buzzing with messages from Linda. She discovered his meeting with us and was unleashing a torrent of threats and accusations. But instead of cowing him into silence, her messages only strengthened his resolve. What Robert proposed next was risky. It could either save my marriage or destroy any chance of reconciliation forever. But with Jessica about to be isolated at the retreat and our children caught in the middle, we were running out of options. Little did we know, while we were playing our next move, Linda was executing a desperate plan of her own, one that would bring everything to a head in the most public and dramatic way possible. Linda's final move was as desperate as it was public. She called an emergency meeting at the church, gathering everyone from Patricia's group along with many other community members. Her plan was to stage an intervention for Robert, Jessica, and me to expose all of us as conspirators against her. But she didn't expect what happened next. I arrived at the church with Robert and Marie just as Linda was mid-speech, dramatically recounting how she'd caught me with another woman. The room was packed. It seemed like half the neighborhood was there. Jessica sat in the front row, looking pale and exhausted, with Emma and Lucas beside her. Patricia stood next to Linda, nodding supportively as Linda wept about her daughter's betrayal in siding with her unfaithful husband. Robert walked straight to the front of the room. For the first time in 40 years of marriage, he raised his voice to Linda. The room fell silent as he described how he'd watched her destroy an innocent man's life, how she'd nearly ruined their own marriage with similar accusations 20 years ago, how she was now willing to sacrifice their daughter's career and happiness for her own paranoid delusions. Then Marie stepped forward. She played the recordings from her phone, the conversations between Linda and Patricia, planning how to prove my guilt, discussing how to isolate Jessica from anyone who might tell her the truth. The church fell silent as Linda's own words exposed the calculated nature of her campaign against me. But the moment that finally broke through to Jessica wasn't any of this evidence. It was Emma, our 8-year-old daughter, who had been digging through her backpack. She pulled out a piece of paper, a drawing she'd made weeks ago. It showed me looking at a blue ring with "Mommy's Surprise" written in crayon at the top. She'd seen me looking at pictures of sapphire rings on my computer and had kept the drawing secret because I'd asked her to help me surprise her mommy. Jessica's hand shook as she took the drawing. She looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in weeks. I finally had the chance to pull out the ring box, to show her grandmother's sapphire in its new setting. The same setting Rachel had helped me design, the same ring Linda had twisted into evidence of betrayal. Linda tried to interrupt, to spin some new explanation, but Robert silenced her with years of pent-up authority. He announced that he'd already scheduled appointments with their old marriage counselor, that Linda needed help before she destroyed any more lives with her paranoia. The aftermath wasn't instantaneous healing, nothing ever is. Jessica and I had a lot to work through. The trust that had been broken wasn't just about Linda's lies. It was about how quickly doubt had crept into our marriage, how easily external influences had shaken our foundation. We started counseling, both as a couple and individually. Linda and Robert began intensive therapy. Patricia's marriage preservation group was disbanded after several other couples came forward with similar stories of manufactured suspicions and baseless accusations. The church leadership formally apologized to everyone who had been affected. It's been 6 months since that day at the church. Jessica and I are living together again, rebuilding our life day by day. The kids are resilient, they bounce back faster than any of us. Emma proudly tells everyone how her drawing helped fix her family, while Lucas has appointed himself the official hugger, making sure everyone gets at least 3 hugs a day. Jessica finally wears her grandmother's sapphire ring, though the story behind it is different from what I'd planned. Instead of just celebrating our past 15 years, it's become a symbol of our commitment to the next 15 and beyond, a reminder that love means choosing to trust, even when the world gives you reasons to doubt. Linda is making progress in therapy, slowly confronting the deep-seated fears that drove her actions. Robert has found his voice again, and their relationship is being rebuilt on a foundation of honesty rather than enablement. Jessica's relationship with her mother is more complicated, they're working through it in family therapy. But some wounds take longer to heal than others. As for me, I've learned that sometimes the deepest cuts come from the people closest to us, but so does the strongest healing. Every morning when I wake up next to Jessica, every time I hear our kids laughing, I'm grateful for the truth that finally came to light. But most of all, I'm grateful for the second chance we all got to rebuild not just our marriage, but our entire family, stronger and wiser than before.